Well, today I want to wrestle with a little bit, why do some people have faith and other people don't have faith? Why do some believe in God and some people don't? This is very interesting to me because I've been all over the map when it comes to faith. Like, there's been times in my life, I grew up in the church, so there was a season in my life where I believed because I thought this is the only option, this is what we do. I went through seasons of serious doubt and questioning the truth of Christianity, came this close to abandoning the path of being a Christian altogether. I've gone through seasons where I'm absolutely confident, completely assured, oh yeah, this is absolutely true. So my dial has been all over the map here on this question of faith. And one of the reasons the question is interesting to me is why do people believe, is there are so many different influences that come into a person's life to help shape that decision. I mean, what are our experiences in life? Were we raised in a home that believes in God? Was that a good home or a bad home? What have our relationships and encounters and experiences been like with people who are Christians? Have they been good or bad? How do we reconcile faith and science? Do we need to? What if we've suffered in life? Have we suffered greatly? This can impact our thinking in terms of faith. Though even that one's interesting because people that go through suffering respond to it in different ways. For example, people that have written on the Holocaust and the suffering of the concentration camps have observed sometimes people went into the concentration camps strong believers in God and came out atheists. But other times, people went into the concentration camps atheists and came out strong believers. So even how people respond to suffering is very different. Unpredictable. So I like the image of a spider web to think about our own personal faith. And what I like about this is if you think about a spider web, is it has multiple anchor points, right? A spider web has several anchor points. And if our faith is the web, typically we believe because of multiple reasons. And so we can think of different reasons that we have to believe as the different anchors for this web. So maybe one of my anchor points might be inward experiences of God. Sometimes I have an emotional experience which convinces me that God is real. Okay, but what if I go through life where that feeling is gone? Okay, maybe I lose that anchor point. Maybe now I go through a season where the heavens are brass. I feel nothing, no sense of God. Well, maybe I lose that anchor point. But the reason I like this illustration is, notice there can still be other anchor points of my faith, reasons for believing that will allow that web to hold. But if I lose enough of those anchor points, the whole web will fail, and I will abandon faith. So I think our web, if you will, is different for every person. If we sat down and talked with people, everybody probably has a different assortment of reasons why they believe in God, why they're on the path of Jesus. So this is a very complicated question, why do people believe? And there's, if you will, the human level. If we look at it on a spiritual level, the situation's mysterious because sometimes the Bible will talk about how God's Spirit gives birth from above. It's God's Spirit that opens people's hearts to believe. So there's also an act of God upon people. It may be that faith is a gift and we are enabled to believe. Okay, well, if that's so, why doesn't God do that for everybody? Or does He do it for everybody and we resist it? It's mysterious. Well, where am I going with all this? I don't know. No, I do. Actually, today we're going to look at a story where Jesus is going to bring up this subject of how miracles, the evidence of miracles, relates to faith. Now, that is not exactly how I've framed the question thus far, but it's close. So basically, we're going to see today and wrestle with how should we put together faith and evidence? What is the role of evidence and argumentation in the life of faith? Why should we believe? Well, let's look at our passage today and see what we might learn from what Jesus says and does. Our passage is the end of John chapter 4, verses 43 to 54. We'll see a transition to this story, and this story will fall into three parts. You can follow along in your outline, either paper form or there within the church app. Okay, so here's the transition to this story. We'll call this Back on Jewish Soil. This is John 4:43. After the 2 days, he, Jesus, left for Galilee. If you were here the last few weeks, we've seen Jesus in a village of the Samaritans, which was non-Jewish territory, kind of in the middle of Israel. Jesus started off down south in Judea, a Jewish stronghold. He now has this encounter in Samaria, non-Jewish territory, and now he pushes on back north to his home region of Galilee. So he's back in Jewish territory. Now in verse 44, we get a confusing line. It's odd. Now Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. That's odd because it says Jesus said, I'm without honor where I come from, but then he says Galilee, where he comes from, people welcomed him. What's going on here? I think we got to read that line in light of the broader story that John is telling about Jesus. And John has told us overall that the dominant reception that Jesus received from the Jewish people was rejection in the end. So we go back to John chapter 1 and verse 11. Look what John has written. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Overall, his own didn't receive him, meaning his countrymen. The ultimate note Jesus experienced was one of rejection. So John reminds us this of here in verse 44. Jesus himself had pointed out a prophet has no honor in his own country. It's reminding us that overall Jesus experiences rejection. And this is in contrast to where was he just welcomed? Among the Samaritans. The hated Samaritans welcomed him. But Jesus' experience among his own people overall was not one of welcome. So verse 44 then colors how we should hear verse 45. Look at 45. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they had also been there. Well, what had Jesus done down there in the south, in Judea, in the Passover? Well, he'd done things like clear the temple. He had performed various miracles of healing. We know about this because Nicodemus in chapter 3 mentions them. So the people up north who welcomed Jesus, they were excited because they saw the sorts of things he was doing down there. Well, we're going to get a bit of an ambiguous verdict in this story of what it means to see Jesus' miracles and believe in him. So we'll see that on one hand, these Galileans are welcoming Jesus because of what they've seen, but we're going to see that ultimately this will be an insufficient response from them. And that matches the overall ambiguousness that we see from Jesus throughout his ministry on the question of miracles and evidence and belief. Sometimes Jesus talks like he performs miracles to self-authenticate, to show he is the one from God. Look at the miracles, you should believe, he says. But other times, he refuses to give a miracle to support faith and seems to expect that you should believe before having a sign like that. So Jesus points both ways in this regard overall, and we'll see him point both ways in this story here today. So let's get to our story proper. Here's part one of this story. We'll call this Cana and Crisis with a challenge. Verse 46. Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. So what we have here today is actually the conclusion of a major section of the Gospel of John. Oftentimes this is called the Cana cycle. It starts at the beginning of chapter 2, actually runs all through chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4. And chapter 1 kicks off with the miracle of turning the water to wine into Cana. And this section ends here at the end of chapter 4 with another miracle that takes place in the village of Cana. And you notice John points back several times in this story to that opening miracle which kicked it off, the transforming the water into wine. In fact, on the back of your outline, I've given you a list of similarities between that miracle of turning the water to wine and the miracle we'll look at today. I won't look at it now. You can look at it on your own. But clearly, John is telling this story in such a way to remind us of that first miracle. So today we end this mini section in John. And the theme of this section has been essentially trusting in Jesus. Well, let's look at this story. There was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. Now, Capernaum was this little village up here on the map. It was a border town, right on a line of division. Over here, up north in Galilee, this was ruled by one son of Herod the Great called Herod Philip. Okay, over here, this side was ruled by another son of Herod the Great called Herod Antipas. Now, Capernaum sat kind of right on the border. and as such, it was likely home to a bunch of administrative government officials that helped run things. And so this, we are told, this royal servant, this government official, comes to Jesus from Capernaum. So most likely, this is a guy who worked for Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas is not a good guy. This is the one who ends up cutting the head off John the Baptist just because he liked a dancing girl. So this guy is a very ungodly, corrupt ruler. And so now coming to Jesus all the way from Capernaum is this royal official, some sort of mid-level government official who works for Herod Antipas. Now this man could be a Gentile. He could be someone who's not Jewish that works for him, though John doesn't tell us this. He could also be a Jewish person working for Herod Antipas. But notice either way, if you are the typical godly, pious, righteous Jewish person, you are going to take a very dim view of either a Gentile working for Herod Antipas or a Jew working for Herod Antipas. So here is a figure that a typical godly Jewish person would look at with very great suspicion. This guy's probably corrupt, we would think. This guy's probably sinful, we would think, if he works for Herod Antipas. Well, look, his son lay sick at Capernaum. If you're a parent, you know the desperation you can feel when your kid gets sick. And we feel that today. It was even worse in the ancient world, where to get a fever was often a death sentence. It's hard to estimate child mortality, but some estimates in the first century say there was a 50% child mortality rate. Half of all children would die before they reached adulthood. We can get a sense of this desperation from a magical amulet that was found in Galilee, right around this region, on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Listen to this language. It belonged to a Jewish woman named Marian. She must have gone to a healer, some sort of Jewish prophet or priest or magic user to get this amulet. Listen to what it says. A good amulet to heal Yaitha, the daughter of Marian, from the fever and the shiver and the evil eye. Then we get a bunch of magical incantations. In the name of I am who I am, amen, amen, Selah. A good amulet to drive out the fever and the shiver and the hectic fever from Yaitha, the daughter of Marian. So Marian's daughter, Yaitha, came down with a terrible fever, and this struck such fear in her mother's heart that she went and paid money to receive this magical charm that she hoped would heal her daughter, and we found it today. Well, this father had some kind of similar desperation. He's heard the story of Jesus. Verse 47, when this man had heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son who was close to death. He must have heard the stories of Jesus as a healer. And by the way, if you heard anything about Jesus in the first century, you would have heard that he was a healer. This is one of the things that spread Jesus' reputation far and wide. About half of his time in the Gospels, we see Jesus teaching, but about the other half of the time, we see him healing people. It's unlikely that his teaching would have received a whole lot of attention without that ministry of healing. Now, what's remarkable is that actually the portrait of Jesus as a miracle worker is something that is considered bedrock in terms of historicity. One of the surest things that we can know about Jesus, simply on a historical level, is that he at least had a wide reputation as a healer. So I actually made a specialized study of this when I did my dissertation. It was on Jesus and Paul as miracle workers. So if you will allow me the conceit, I am quoting myself on the back of your outline. Here's a quote out of my own book, just for my own pleasure. Here it is. Listen. The majority of scholars studying the historical Jesus agree that what Jesus performed, what were considered healings and exorcisms. This view is held even by those who might not accept the supernatural on philosophical grounds, or who view the miraculous as something historical methods cannot assess. Rather, what is accepted is that Jesus was believed by his contemporaries to have performed healings and exorcisms. For example, Ehrman, a non-Christian, calls himself an agnostic atheist, writes that regardless of one's philosophical view, what cannot be denied is that Jesus had a reputation for performing miracles. So this is historical bedrock. One of the surest things we can know about the actual Jesus of Nazareth was he was widely reputed as a healer and a miracle worker. Now, the tools of history cannot prove were those real miracles or not. So what you and I think about that will depend on a whole bunch of things like, what are our philosophical pre-commitments? Are we open to the idea of a God who may interrupt the natural world to do things from time to time? Or do we dismiss out of hand the very possibility? But it's cool to know one of the surest things we can know about Jesus was, at the very least, lots of people thought he could perform miraculous healings. Actually, he's the best attested miracle worker anywhere in either century in any direction. The evidence historically we have for Jesus as a miracle worker is remarkable. Well, this royal official has heard of this, and so he comes to Jesus to beg him for healing. So from Capernaum to Cana, that's like a 15-mile walk, or chariot ride, since this guy is probably pretty well off. And he begged Jesus to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Begged him. So this guy comes to Jesus and begs Jesus, please come and heal my son, he's close to death. Now, if you're Jesus, what do you say to this guy? I bet you none of us would say what Jesus says to this guy. Look at this. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you'll never believe. Wow, Jesus. That sounds mean. Holy cow. This guy's coming to you and just asking. He clearly thinks you can do it. He comes and begs you to save his son. If you don't see signs and wonders, you'll never believe. Jesus doesn't do what we expect all the time, something you'll notice in the Gospels. This sounds like a rebuff. It sounds very insulting. Same sort of thing Jesus says in the story of the Syrophoenician woman who comes to him again, another outsider, a foreigner, comes to Jesus and says, my daughter is possessed by a demon. And Jesus says, it's not right to give the dogs the food of the children. Again, very insulting, very significant rebuff. Well, it's true, Jesus does say this to the man, unless you people see signs and wonders, you'll never believe. Notice he's also talking to the crowd, though. That you people, that's plural. So yeah, he's talking to the man, but he's also addressing the crowd that John has told us is there because they've seen the things he's done, the signs and wonders. And notice this is a parallel with that story that kicked off this cycle, the changing of the water into wine. Remember, Mary comes to Jesus. They ran out of wine. Jesus is like, what does that have to do with me? An apparent rebuff, an apparent refusal to help, just like we see in this story. So Jesus seems to discern there's an unhealthy eagerness in the crowd to see these miracles. And who can blame the crowd, really? Okay, same time, this is kind of insulting. So this royal official who's come all this way now has a choice. Is he going to receive this as an insult? How is he going to respond to this? Is he going to say, that's it, I knew I shouldn't have bothered with a Jew like you, turn around and leave? Is he going to take offense? What's he going to do? Well, he won't take no for an answer, kind of like Mary didn't. Look at part 2 of our story. Persistence and faith without a miracle. Just like in the story of the turning of the water to wine, we see Jesus respond very well to someone who won't take no for an answer. Verse 49, the royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies. He overlooks the insult. He overlooks the potential offense and just says, please come and help my child. He says come down because Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee is actually 700 feet below sea level. So anytime you go to Capernaum, you're going down. He says, come down before my child dies. Look at verse 50. Go, Jesus replied. Your son will live. Again, we see Jesus responding well to the boldness of this guy who won't take no for an answer. Jesus tells him, okay, go home. Your son will live. Okay, but notice this presents this guy with another choice now. What did he ask Jesus to do? Come with me. Come see my boy. Put your hands on him, heal him. Jesus says, okay, your boy will live. Go. Okay, now the guy has another choice. This is not what he wanted. He wanted Jesus to come with him. But now he's asked to believe Jesus' assurance that if he just leaves and goes those 15 miles back home, his boy will be okay. What would you do? It's uncomfortable. It's like, so we had strep throat go through our house last week. And so we went and got diagnosed, and the sore throat that doesn't go away, and you need antibiotics. So imagine I walk up to Walgreens with my subscription. I go to the pharmacist. I say, okay, here's my subscription. And the pharmacist looks at it, says, you don't need antibiotics, just go home, you'll be well. It's kind of, the doctor said, I should use it. No, just go home, you'll be fine. I mean, that's a little uncomfortable, right? So Jesus says to this guy, you don't need antibiotics, just go home, he'll be fine. That's a serious challenge. Well, look what the story says. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. Okay, he said. He trusted Jesus. So here we see a remarkable faith. One of the consistent themes we tend to see if we cast our eye across all the traditions that have come down to us about Jesus is that Jesus' message and his person resonated well with the outsiders, the people that you would not expect to respond to him rightly. And we've seen that right here in this very set of stories. Because in this section in the Gospel of John, the person that we would have expected respond to Jesus the best has responded the worst. Nicodemus in chapter 3. Here's the Pharisee. Here's the religious leader. Here's the godly man. We would expect him to respond rightly to Jesus. And over the course of the story of the Gospel of John, we see he does respond rightly to Jesus. But in chapter 3, he's full of confusion. He doesn't get it. This stands in clear contrast with the Samaritan woman who gets it, with the Samaritan villagers who get it and believe in him as Savior of the world. And it contrasts with this Gentile or corrupt Jewish government official working for the corrupt administration who believes in Jesus. So again, we see this unexpected flip-flop where the people everyone would have expected to respond rightly to Jesus often doesn't, but the outsiders, the rejects, the ones that others would look down on, these surprisingly tend to showcase the right and proper response to Jesus, and we see this man doing it here. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. So notice, here's an example of faith without seeing a miracle. The guy just had to take Jesus at his word and go home. So here is a stamp of approval, an affirmation on faith without seeing a miracle. So what do we make of that? Is that saying that we should believe without any evidence at all? And that is, by the way, how our culture typically talks about faith. We have a very bad way of thinking about faith in our culture. Usually when we talk about faith in our culture, people mean believing something without evidence, or worse, believing something against evidence. Yeah, you just got to have faith. Is that what's going on in this story, though? Is this guy being asked to believe in Jesus without evidence? No, I don't think so. Yeah, he's being asked to believe without a miracle yet, but he's not without some evidence. Why has he come to Jesus to begin with? He's heard that Jesus heals people. So there's some evidence. He knows words of mouth. Jesus does this sort of thing. And he comes to Jesus, and he stands there and sees Jesus and listens to him. Now, I don't know what exactly that was like, but it must have been something. I bet you there was something about Jesus and his personhood and his presence and the way he talked and the things he said. This functioned as a kind of evidence. I bet you. So yes, this guy believes without a miracle, but I don't think he's being asked to believe with no evidence whatsoever. There's some evidence. Now, does that prove to him his boy is going to be healed? No. He's going to have to take a step of faith beyond what that evidence can show, but he's not being asked to do this entirely without evidence. So let's think about this question of faith this way. So look at this slide here. Notice, Christian faith is a step of commitment, but it is not a step of commitment without evidence. It is not a blind faith. We're not just arbitrarily asking you, hey, believe in Jesus. Go for it. Why should I believe that? No reason. You should just believe it. Okay, that is not the best way to think about Christian faith. It is also not a step of faith against the evidence. Okay, that's even worse. Yeah, I know this doesn't look like it's true at all, but you should believe it anyway. That's not what we mean. What we mean in a proper understanding of Christian faith is, yes, it is a step of faith, but it is a step of faith in line with the evidence, in accordance with the evidence. So there is a step of faith and commitment that's required because you can't see all the info, you can't get it proved 100%, but the evidence is pointing this direction. You're being asked to take a step of faith beyond what that evidence can show, ultimately, because you're never going to have 100% assurance, but this nonetheless is the direction the evidence is showing. So are we ever going to be 100% sure that the Bible is true? Are we ever going to be able to demonstrate there's 100% certainty that God exists and Jesus is real and he's the Son of God and he rose from the dead? How could we? How could we prove the Bible is 100%? How could we 100% prove it? We'd have to have access to all historical information. We'd have to know all the details that have ever come down to us. And yet, look, what has survived from history is largely random and piecemeal. We're never going to be able to demonstrate with 100% certainty the Bible is true, Jesus rose from the dead, God is real. Can't do that. But what we can do is show there is significant and serious evidence for the truthfulness of the Bible, for Jesus' resurrection and the existence of God. So the step of faith we are asking you to take is not without evidence, it's not against the evidence, but it is in line with the evidence. Nonetheless, there is a step of faith required. I like the illustration of marriage. So say someone's going to get married. Okay, notice that is a step of faith. You are making a commitment. Now, if you're getting married, do you know every single thing there is to know about that person? No. Do you have 100% certainty that person will not betray you or abandon you? No. So notice, you don't have complete certainty that this is the right thing to do. But you take a step of faith and you commit to it. Why? Because hopefully you have some evidence that this is a trustworthy person. Like hopefully you know this person well enough. Yeah, no, I don't see any red flags here. Everything I know about this person is in line with them being trustworthy and I can marry them. That is similarly, I think, a good way to think about Christian commitment. You're not going to have 100% certainty, but you can know enough. You can see enough. You're like, you know what? This looks like the best deal in town. I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to step out in faith in line with what this evidence is. So Christian faith is not a blind faith. It is faith, but it's faith in line with the evidence, not faith with no evidence or against the evidence. Well, here's part 3. Resolution and faith, now with a miracle. Verse 51, while he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday, at 1 p.m, the fever left him. And the father realized that this was the exact time in which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. It's pretty cool. Now, as probably doesn't surprise you, this sort of thing continues to happen from time to time. So let me read you 4 short stories. The first of these is from a very good book on miracles by New Testament scholar Craig Keener. He compiles a whole bunch of testimonies and stories about God continuing to intervene miraculously in our world. So listen to one of these. This is related to him personally by the boy involved and the father. On a Tuesday evening in April 2007, Matthew Dawson, a youth with a mission leader from New Zealand, was hospitalized in Australia, delirious, with excruciating pain. 8 hours later, doctors confirmed he had meningitis. After Matthew had been in the emergency room for nearly 48 hours, the doctor ordered him moved to a different room, warning that it might be weeks or even months before he would be well enough to leave. As he was being moved, however, on Thursday evening at 6:15 p.m., his body suddenly felt warm. Although doses of morphine over the past 42 hours had not significantly alleviated his pain, the pain now instantly vanished. He felt well, and within minutes he fell asleep. When he woke at 1 p.m. the next day, he insisted he was fine. Tests then revealed that there was nothing wrong with him physically. The doctor who examined him was shocked, but confirmed that he was well and released him that afternoon. Soon after this experience, he called his father and learned that, quote, the moment of my healing was exactly at the end of a meeting that my father had called together to pray for my healing. Pretty cool. Here are 4 quick accounts that I just happened to come across this week because I was reading about something else. This is by a guy named Kenneth McCall. He was a Christian missionary surgeon in China before World War II, spent 4 years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and after that became a psychiatrist. And so he's writing here in an article he published describing accounts of deliverance from evil spirits. So in his work as a psychiatrist, he said about 4% of his patients needed exorcism. Here's just 3 accounts that happen to connect with this sort of at-a-distance intervention. Listen to this. Case 1, an elderly woman complained of, quote, heart disease. None was found after full investigation, but she remained convinced of her handicap. And so he went into a kind of deliverance ministry with her. At the moment when she in prayer, quote, cut the umbilical cord of her youngest child, end quote, her son, who unknown to us was a schizophrenic in a hospital 400 miles away, was cured. His wife, suffering from tuberculosis, also became perfectly well, and they were reunited. There's been complete control of this man's life by his mother from an early age when his father had died. The heart condition also cleared. His assessment, some kind of demonic oppression, which was instantly cleared up from a distance. Similar, listen to this. Case 5, another lady, also in a padded cell because of her violent attacks, was recognized to be acting out the violence of her 16th century ancestors. It was impossible to communicate with her. But the moment we decided, with her family and church, to hold a service of communion and lay before our Lord the problem of this repeated pattern of family behavior, at that very moment, the patient was cured and became perfectly normal. Then, to our utter amazement, a message came from another country where, unknown to us, an aunt, also a patient in a mental hospital, had suddenly been cured. Case 10, a middle-aged lady from a comfortable home was an alcoholic, and this was causing considerable trouble in her family. It was found that her mother had dabbled in witchcraft and had put a curse on her daughter in a fit of anger. In this case, a group of people, quite unknown to either mother or daughter, decided to pray at a certain time, and from that moment, the patient was free of the grip of alcohol and has remained so. It must be said, in this case, the patient herself was seeking release. So just interesting, 4 pretty credible, good accounts of God doing similar things, intervening miraculously at a distance when people prayed to him. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it happens. And so I appreciate these guys recording it for us. So Jesus works a powerful miracle in this story. Heals this boy from a distance. What is the result? Look, verse 53. So he and his whole household believed. So the official that came believed in Jesus because of this. The boy that was healed believed in Jesus because of this. Heck, the whole family, servants, slaves, whoever lived in that household, everybody became a believer in Jesus. And you can see why. Verse 54, this was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. And that's the end of John in the Gospel of John numbering these miracles. We know John's not numbering all the miracles because Jesus has done other ones down in Judea, we've already been told. But this is kicking off the paradigmatic miracles that John is going to record Jesus doing. Changing water into wine, showcasing in the transformation of the water that was in the Jewish jars used for purification into something better, wine, showing that Jesus brought something new. And here, showing powerfully Jesus' power as the giver of life, which is going to be the theme of the next section of the Gospel of John. So, one last thing to notice. In this story, Jesus affirms faith before a miracle, right? Because the Father goes and obeys, takes Jesus at his word before he gets the miracle. So that is affirmed. But notice at the same time, this story also affirms faith after a miracle, because after the healing, what are we told happens? Everybody in the family believes. So we see that there is a legitimate faith that we can be asked to have before we see a miraculous intervention, but we also see that sometimes seeing a miracle, this too is supposed to lead us from faith, to faith. Both are acceptable as long as they are sincere faiths in Jesus. Okay, so bottom line in this story, what would be the point of this? What would John expect us to see in this second of the miracles that he records of Jesus up there in Galilee? Let's put it this way. Bottom line, trust in the word of Jesus, the life giver. Trust in the word of Jesus, the life giver. This whole theme, chapter 2, 3, 4, has been about trusting in Jesus. We see the Father doing this. It literally says, and he took Jesus at his word and went home. And we see the results. This boy is restored to life. And this will intro the next section where we see Jesus uniquely as the one that God has equipped to give eternal life. So again, as so often in the Gospels, the call is a call to trust Jesus. And like Justin shared, to trust the instruments. Doesn't looks like I should pull up. Nope. You keep trusting the word of Jesus. 3 suggestions. First, by understanding that trusting in Jesus is a step of faith according to the evidence. Remember, this is not a blind faith. We're not asking you to make a commitment without evidence. We're not asking you to make a commitment against the evidence. No, full-rounded, grounded Christian faith is a step of commitment. It is a step of faith, but it is according to the evidence, in line with the evidence. Second, by thinking through your own reasons for faith using the illustration of a spider web. This is a fruitful exercise. I suggest you get some time this week, get out a piece of paper and say, okay, if I were to draw a spider web, and if I were to think about, okay, why do I believe in Jesus? What are specific reasons that I can articulate? Maybe come up with those reasons and then draw them on a web. Okay, which of those anchor points are strong? Which are weak? Do you think you need more of them? It's an interesting exercise because we don't always think through why we believe. On what basis do we believe? And at some level, it's mysterious sometimes. Sometimes we just have a sense of God's reality and His presence with us. Well, that would be one of the anchor points. But not everybody has that. Third, by taking the next step of trusting in Jesus, whatever that looks like. Your story and where you find yourself will be as different from everybody else as your web will look different from them. But wherever you're at, what do you think the next step of trusting Jesus looks like? Maybe it's launching in some course of action. Maybe it's digging into and studying some of the doubts and wrestling with some of the challenges to faith in your life. Maybe it's simply sitting back and choosing to believe that Jesus really has you. You're accepted by Him. We're going to celebrate communion at this time, the Lord's Supper. And this is a great opportunity to pause and to go before the Lord and think through these things. So our ushers are going to hand out the bread. And as that's coming, I invite you to close your eyes, go before the Lord, and just cast your eyes, so to speak, over your life. What is the state of your faith web today? Where do you think the Lord would be leading you to take the next step of trusting in Jesus? Today we look at the second of these major miracles, these signs, in the first part of the Gospel of John. The story, we see another unlikely outsider, but one who is driven by desperation and faith to seek out Jesus. And we see Jesus apparently give him a rebuff. No. But the man in faith and humility persists. And Jesus assures him the boy will be healed. And so we're told the man takes Jesus at his word and goes. And of course, at that very moment when he gets home, finds out at that moment the boy had been healed, and he and his whole family believe. It's a beautiful story. Bottom line, clearly for us, trust in the word of Jesus, the life giver. So in this story, we see there's a place for faith without a miracle. There's a place for faith in response to a miracle. But as we wrestle with this tension of where is the place of evidence and faith and why do we believe, it's fair to say that Christian faith is not a commitment that is of blind faith. It is not a commitment without faith. It is without evidence, It is not a step of commitment against the evidence. No, we can make a robust case for the existence of God. We can make a robust case for the resurrection of Jesus. But those arguments will only carry us so far. There is a step of faith. You must take Jesus at his word. Much like the act of getting married, it is a commitment stepping beyond what all the evidence can prove. But nonetheless, it is a step in the direction the evidence is pointing. We'll have some members of our prayer team up in this corner today. If you need prayer for any reason, we invite you to come up and touch base with them. The rest of us, let us go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Repay no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honor everyone. Love and serve the Lord, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.